Welcome all. Just hold on for a few seconds and we'll start shortly. Okay, bonjour and welcome to today's webinar, Building Adaptation Skills for Engineers. This webinar is the first of 7 that will comprise the Building Adaptation Skills for a Changing Climate webinar series. Claire, you can please change the slide so people can see the list of webinars. So this fall series will share experiences on how to build climate change adaptation skills. So my name is Dominique Auger, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm a policy analyst at Natural Resources Canada in the Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation Division. Avant de poursuivre, je tiens à souligner que je suis située dans la ville de Québec, où les territoires traditionnels et de traité de plusieurs Premières Nations se rencontrent, dont le territoire de la nation Huron-Wendat. I also recognize that we're all working in a different place, and therefore you're working on another Indigenous territory, and I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on that. So the webinar today is made possible with funding support from Natural Resources Canada through the Building Regional Adaptation Capacity and Expertise Program, which is better known as BRACE. BRACE was a 5-year program funded under the Pan-Canadian Framework. The program wrapped up in March 2022, and it funded 20 projects across several themes, including engineering, to increase capacity of organizations, professionals, communities, and businesses to adapt. My colleague will add the link to the BRACE webpage in the chat, so where you'll be able to find a list of the BRACE projects and some results. The webinar series that is being launched today features work done under the BRACE project and also other related initiatives. So a few technical information before we start. Claire Sanders from the Climate Risk Institute is your technical support person for today, and she's available if you run into audio or technical issues. You can click on the chat box and find her name in the drop-down menu of participant to send her a direct message. Please note that your microphones have been automatically muted to avoid any audio distractions or feedback during the webinar. We will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but that doesn't mean that you have to hold on your question until then. So please feel free to type out your questions during the presentation in the Q&A box. And there's also the chat box if you'd like to submit comments. Notez que le webinaire est en anglais seulement, mais vous pouvez poser des questions en français, il n'y a aucun problème. We are recording the webinar today and we'll be sending out a link to everyone who has registered along with a copy of the presentation slides. So on behalf of everyone joining us, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our speakers today, Curt, Serge, and Paul. So Claire, if you could change the slide, please. Oh, sorry, you had some information on BRACE that you will be able to look at when you receive the presentation. So without further ado, I'm pleased to include Curt Hull. Curt, a professional engineer, is a Manitoba-based sustainability consultant and is project director of Climate Change Connection in Winnipeg. He works with NGOs, businesses, university, colleges, as well as all levels of government to build a fossil fuel-free future. Curt serves on the board of Sustainable Building Manitoba and the Climate Reality Project Canada. He also works on clean energy and sustainability projects with Diesel and Winter Road Dependent First Nation in Northern Manitoba. In addition, Curt works with and advises Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba and their climate change initiatives. So the floor is yours, Curt.
Merci, Dominique. Thank you very much. So I'm going to give a brief presentation about what we've done in Manitoba with respect to the BRACE project and our approach to it to build resilient capacity for resilient climate resilience for practitioners. But the overarching theme, if you will, in my presentation has to do with collaboration and the way that we've encouraged collaboration amongst many stakeholders and contributors in the development of our program. Next slide, please. So in way of introduction to our project, give you a sense of what it is that we've done. Next slide. As Dominique said, there are BRACE projects, some 20 across the country. And in Manitoba, we've called what we've delivered the Manitoba Climate Resilience Training Program. Next slide, please. And in doing so, the approach we've taken is a sector approach, like you see in this slide. So ICLEI worked with the provincial government as the overall project coordination, and then we developed courses and audiences in the 4 sectors that you see below that coordination band. So we've got the Prairie Climate Center working with the planner sector. We've got the group that I worked with most closely, the Engineers, Geoscientists, Manitoba, and Infrastructure. Dillon Consulting worked on Northern Business. And for the Indigenous sector, Prairie Climate Center had connections with Turtle Lodge, which is primarily out of Saugeen First Nation in eastern Manitoba. And through that lens, encouraged and incorporated contributions from other representatives of the Indigenous community. Next slide, please. So in approaching the infrastructure sector, which is, I was the project manager for doing that we started by engagement. And this works back to that collaboration theme, where we had primarily three engagement sessions where we invited stakeholders that we sent out messages to and invited them to attend so that we could get a better sense from them as to what courses, what knowledge, what tools would be the most appropriate for them. And so we got some engagement, as you can see from that table. Next slide, please. And when we had those engagement sessions, we took polls and questionnaires and conversations, different breakout groups and things like that. And we gathered as much information as we could as far as what it is that we should deliver to them. Next slide, please. And an example of that would be a poll taken during one of the sessions, asking them to give us a sense of their situation in the last few years. How much, if at all, has climate change altered the way you plan to design infrastructure, et cetera. So that's just one example of a number of questions we put together and gathered information. So it's information gathering at the onset before we went too far into delivering of training. Next slide, please. And in addition to those engagement sessions where we had sort of live conversation going on and polling and surveying within that session. Next slide. We did a survey where we sent out a survey to the list that we had access to, which was Engineers, Geoscientists, Manitoba, our distribution list, and we came up with results from them as far as what their willingness to, what's their appetite, and more specifically, what kinds of courses would they like to see delivered. Next slide, please. So what was developed? What resources did we develop? Next slide, please. So what you see here in this graphic is different. The different colors represent the different those different sectors that I showed you in a previous slide. So ICLEI did that dark purple one. Planning was green. Ours was the blue one. Click, Claire, if you want to click. There we go. So those three courses were what was specifically developed by our sector. But click again, please. But we suggested a pathway, an infrastructure pathway, if you will, to all of the audiences that we were able to reach out to, which included some courses from the other sectors, realizing that there wasn't a silo we're talking about here, instead of this more holistic approach. And there were courses that we recommended to people to take. One more click. And we also offered a primer session for individuals who just didn't feel comfortable or had questions, whatever. We had a special session for whomever wanted to sort of do a pre-conversation. Next slide. And what we came up with overall, amongst all of those sectors, was a catalog of courses, a whole slate of courses. And you saw that in the previous slide. And there was information that was disseminated throughout potential audiences as to what courses were available. Next slide. And it was through the website, the Manitoba Climate Resilience Training website, that we made people aware of the courses that they might want to sign up to. Next, click one more time. So that we gave them more details as to what might be going on in each of those courses, how to register for the courses. We used that website extensively for that. One more click. And then once the session had been delivered, we had a recording of the session. It was put up on YouTube and then made available for those who couldn't attend. Next slide. So what did we learn? And you know, what did we learn from that, basically? Next slide. So what we kept track of who attended, and we've got lots of details as to what sector they represented, where they worked, what kind of work they did. And so we learned a lot about who might be interested in this topic. And we also interested, just as an example here on this summary slide, you can see that we had overall for the 3 courses, just over 700 people register, and just 400 people that were able to attend. So we can learn from that, or we can infer that perhaps if we had offered that course more than once, we only offered the 3 courses one time each. Perhaps someone who wanted to attend, they registered, but something came up on the day and they weren't able to attend. Maybe if we offered it more than once, we might have had an opportunity to reach more people more specifically. Next slide. But again, during each of those, at the end of each of those sessions that we put together, we had sent out a survey with information, asking them for how did things go, what would you like improved. Next slide. So there was, the click the box kind of thing, but the information that we gleaned that was even more important, I think, was the comments that were received. And so we cataloged them all and we got them all organized and things like that. Next slide. So where are we going from here? Next slide. All of the information that we put together is now available on Climate West, climatewest.ca. Next slide. And within the climatewest.ca website, you can see training from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, the Prairie provinces. And so the videos are available there. Next slide. And we're currently hopeful that we're going to move on to a Manitoba Climate Resilience Training 2. We don't currently have funding for that. There is a desire to go there for Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba, but nothing concrete. So next slide is to express a thank you, next slide, for the contributors. And this is just a small sample of the contributing organizations. Click once more, Claire, but I want to specifically thank those that actually helped develop the courses that we put forward. For nature-based infrastructure was IISD, and for the codes course that we put forward was the Red River Community College Polytechnic. And so that is a sense of the collaborative approach that we took for our delivery of our MCRT. And that's me, Dominique. Thank you.
Thanks, Curt, for this very interesting presentation and for fitting all these slides into your dedicated time. And just a reminder that the slides and the presentations will be made available after the webinar if you want to have a closer look at the information. So at this point, I'm just checking if there's any clarification question in the Q&A box. And we will open the Q&A more broadly after the three presentations. So I say question, but we'll wait after the pre-presentation as it's more an in-depth question. So, okay, thank you again, Curt. I'll now introduce Paul Cobb. Paul is a manager of training services with the Climate Risk Institute. An engineer by training, he has dedicated his career to finding and implementing climate change solutions. Paul's work spans 20 years in this field of mitigation and adaptation. He is currently coordinating CRI's work with multiple partners and experts to develop and deliver professional development programs for engineers, planners, and other professionals, including the Infrastructure Resilience Professional Credential. So over to you, Paul.
All right. Thank you to NRCan for hosting this webinar, and certainly thanks to colleagues Curt and Serge for their presentations as well, and thanks to everybody for joining us. Happy to be here. I wanted to get this up. Just first thing is this constant reminder or disclaimer that we need to remember, in the adaptation and resilience community, is that we really can't forget the primacy and the urgency of the greenhouse gas mitigation effort. Thanks for going to the next slide there. It's essential and it's critical to the sustainability and the health of the ecosystems we depend on. It's vital for human security, and without the urgent action here, our collective efforts around resilience and adaptation become much, much more difficult. In the last few weeks alone, and just thinking about the last few weeks, there's been reports on our sort of collective global and rapid approach to several critical ecosystem tipping points. We've seen record heat in California. My in-laws had flooding on the south shore of Montreal just yesterday, and of course we are seeing unprecedented flooding and humanitarian disasters in Pakistan. So despite all of our work on the adaptation and the mitigation, or on the adaptation and the resilience side, please do not forget the critical and vital importance of the efforts that you make on the mitigation side. It really is the critical piece, and we can't focus on one without the other. Okay, sorry, a little sidebar there. Next slide there. So Climate Risk Institute, just as a very brief background, we are a not-for-profit academically affiliated organization. We do work to advance practice and deliver services related to climate change and risk assessment and adaptation planning. We have done policy work as well to support all levels of government. We were incorporated only 3 years ago. However, we have plenty of years experience prior to that as the Ontario Centre for Climate Impacts and Adaptation Resources. And training is becoming a larger part of the work that we do. Next slide. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of examples here around the evolution of practice when it comes to infrastructure engineering and infrastructure practice. For infrastructure at all scales in Canada and internationally, and whether you're working at the design stage or the operation or the asset management stage, there is an increasing recognition that climate risk is part of the work of infrastructure practitioners and professionals. This example here, just from the Infrastructure Canada Climate Lens, where the completion of the resilience assessment is a requirement for projects. So within that, it says Infrastructure Canada recognizes that responsibility is vested in the professional judgment of licensed professional engineers and/or registered planners. So there's an expectation there on major infrastructure projects, certainly, that there is knowledge of and appropriate treatment and management of climate-related risks. Next slide. We are also seeing, in this example from Alberta and APEGA, as a very recent example, is that professional associations and regulating bodies are certainly outlining expectations and obligations of their professional members. So whether you're an engineer or a planner or another practitioner sort of in in the infrastructure field, there is increasing clarity on sort of what risks must be handled and what the expectations of professionals are. So you can find statements, here the example is APEGA. Canadian Institute of Planners has certainly done a lot of work and on this, and has expectations for registered planners as well, which if you attend the next webinar, you may hear about too. So the landscape is certainly changing when it comes to expectations of knowledge of climate and of risk management in this sector. Okay, next slide. And I mentioned that because it's really in this spirit that Climate Risk Institute's training and program has been sort of rapidly evolving and growing. So in addition to the adaptation services that we do, we now have those professional development training programs and courses across different sectors. We have done some training internationally of late as well, which has been very exciting for us, including a recent course on the PIEVC protocol in the Kingdom of Lesotho. So that has been great. And just would like to take a moment here to recognize Brace and the NRCan team as a whole for the support in developing and or redeveloping many of the courses that make up the suite of training programs that we do have available. So you see now that we have a suite of programs or a suite of training on infrastructure resilience and engineering, and I'll get to those in just a moment. But we also have training in planning that is available now. We are developing training in the forestry sector and have in the works plans for developing training for public health as well. So we hope to continue to expand these programs to other areas. Okay, next slide. So our core courses for infrastructure professionals are all now available. These courses are designed with the intent of covering the range of skills and competencies that engineers and infrastructure professionals are going to require to be building and operating, maintaining, commissioning, procuring resilient infrastructure now and into the future. So we're trying to cover the fundamentals and the basis across a number of different practice areas. And while the primary audience is the engineering and infrastructure professional, we certainly have found that the courses often appeal to and draw practitioners in related fields and from multiple sectors. So just, and you can consult the either our website or the slides that went out to take another look at that. I don't want to hear too long on the list of courses there. So next slide. So just an example here, each of the courses is really designed with a specific learning outcome, and we've found that that's an important part of the process for us, as well as making clear to the learners what the expectations are. So from that, the input on those learning outcomes really comes through our engagement with our review committees that is made up of experts and practitioners in the field. So the example here is from the course on the PIEVC protocol. And just to say that, we don't just tackle the technical elements of that. We know that, engineers and infrastructure practitioners are very good often at those technical elements of it. So we have to introduce and cover some of those aspects, but there are a lot of other sort of non-technical things, risk communication, for example, dealing with uncertainty, establishing teams, that are very important, and we try to, through the process of the course, and lean into those a little bit, cover that, and through the exercises and the engagement in the activities of the course, throughout the courses, kind of promote, promote an understanding of those other challenges that may exist. Slide. So each course is designed around a series of modules, each with its own set of activities. They're hosted on a new learning management system. It's good because we get to provide, a mix of self-paced learning and activities, everything from sort of watching pre-recorded videos and lectures to completing the readings all in your own time, as well as having opportunities to engage directly with, instructors and peers in a sort of live setting. Next slide. One of the things that we have found is that it is great to hear from your peers and experts that have a lot of experience in the field. So when we design our courses and when we work on the courses, we work with our associates, and they come from across the country in a number of different fields. So we're really privileged to have them on board as instructors with all these courses. So we work hand in hand with them on the course design and help facilitate the process for them to translate their knowledge, and their expertise and their experience. So just a few examples of the instructors that we have there. And next slide. Which brings us to what the Infrastructure Resilience Professional Credential actually is. So the IRP Credential and the IRP program, was really designed to help ensure that infrastructure practitioners have that broad suite of knowledge and competencies required to advance climate resilient approaches for planning, design, and management of infrastructure. Of note, Engineers Canada, of course, the umbrella organization for the regional regulators, launched the program in 2016 as a series of 4 courses, including the IBC protocol. And in 2020, Climate Risk Institute took over sort of the management of both the training courses and the management of the credential as well. Slide. So to obtain the credential, the requirements are that you complete each of these 6 courses, and eligibility for the credential at this time is limited to engineers licensed to practice in Canada. There's also a sort of final exam at the conclusion of all the courses, and there is a requirement for a demonstration of related experience. So all of those go into your application for the IRP credential. Next slide. And with regard to this, we just want to make it clear that all of this is based on sort of the guidance from experts and leaders within industry. So we do have and are forming a national steering committee to provide oversight and guidance on the credential as a whole. We do have course review committees to make sure that we're staying abreast of advances in the field and are covering the right topics for professionals. And we are working hand in hand with e-learning and instructional design experts at Royal Roads to make sure that we're bringing the best of learning approaches to your experience. Next slide. And then with regard to the IRP credential, we're really happy to see it. I think the first example still from the Halifax Regional Municipality of the IRP credential being recognized as a way to ensure that the professionals working on infrastructure in an at-risk zone within the municipality, to ensure that the professionals working on that design and commissioning of new facilities there, do have the appropriate skills to be managing climate-related risk. And then last, as sort of a pairing with the training that we have available, there is a new platform, which is sort of a joint effort being launched by Climate Risk Institute, as well as folks at the Resilience by Design Lab at Royal Roads University, to bring together a couple of different networks of adaptation practitioners and communities of practice. So we are moving forward with the launch of what it's going to be called CanAdapt, and it should be a new home for climate training and resources and communities of practice. So hopefully you'll find access to peers and resources and training opportunities there. A few final notes on the last slide. It's been a tremendous opportunity over the last few years to learn about online delivery via new platforms. We are working with our instructors to give them advice and tips on how to engage with people, as well as using the new capabilities of new platforms to make sure that the learning experience is as good as possible for everybody that comes into the courses. We have had some training in French recently in partnership with Uhanos Consortium, which was great, and we hope to continue to expand the offerings of all of our courses with them in the future. And of last note, we find that the relationships with the regulators is really critical, and we are endeavoring to do our best to engage and collaborate with the regulatory bodies, including Engineers Canada and the provincial regulators, through participation in stewardship committees and course review committees, to ensure that they have confidence, in the courses that are there, and that they have knowledge of them, and that they provide value to their members. I think that's it for me. So thank you for that, and looking forward to questions at the end. Pass it over to Serge. Back to Dominique. Merci.
Thanks, Paul. And before we move to Serge, I see two clarification questions that you can probably address now, since it's probably going to be a quick answer. So are all six courses offered online? And why is the credential limited to engineers?
Two good questions. Yes, all of the courses are virtual and online. So we've got several of the courses coming up in the short term. So you can find them at our website on the training site there. So we've got 4 courses available this fall, starting as soon as next week and towards the end of the month. So they are all virtual and online courses. And why is it limited to engineers? The credential was originally designed by and for engineers with Engineers Canada. We are exploring options to either to expand either an analogous credential to other practitioners, whether those are engineering technicians or sort of adjacent or other professional fields such as architecture or. We are exploring, actively exploring options to expand the eligibility to this or other credentials.
Great, thanks, Paul, for your answers. And I will now introduce our third and final presenter, Serge Dupuis. So Serge, a professional engineers, fellow Engineers Canada, is an assistant professor with the Civil Engineering Department of Université de Moncton, specializing in construction and project management. In 2019, Serge was elected the 100th president of Engineers Geoscientists New Brunswick. Serge was recently the project lead on a project entitled Climate Change Adaptation Capacity Building for New Brunswick Engineers, supported by a BRACE. So Serge, you are on stage.
Parfait. Merci tout le monde. Bonjour à tous. Can you see me? I don't see myself, but that's fine. I don't need to. Good day, everyone. What a privilege it is for me to be speaking to you all today, and especially alongside such esteemed colleagues as Curt Hull and Paul Cobb on my subject, which is trying to adapt our New Brunswick engineers to use climate adaptation knowledge on our critical infrastructure. Next slide, please. As I represent the views from Atlantic Canada today, we like to think that we have it all. Beautiful rivers, long beaches, majestic forests, salty sea breezes, magical snow. We also have devoted professionals. But, next slide, please. When we say Atlantic Canada has everything, well, we have torrential rains, storm surges, ice storms, extreme snow events. We even had a tornado in New Brunswick. Now, how do we keep these devoted professionals interested in what we're doing? And these critical weather events will keep coming. So how can we best prepare these devoted professionals to respond to these crises? Next slide, please. We are now wondering, what is our place as climate change professionals towards this critical issue? So first off, we have all professional disciplines. I'm talking engineers today, but there are others also that work in the climate change practitioner realm. So we feel that the professionals are key in the battle against a changing climate, but it must complement the interdisciplinary work that is essential. As engineers all by ourselves, we can't do it all. Sometimes we like to think we can, but we cannot. We need to work with others to find the right solutions. Now, on the professional side, they do understand the need to build resilience through climate change adaptation. They fight to reduce the risks and costs related to the repercussions of climate change, and also promote informed climate change-based decision-making, which I find is very important. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at our project specific to New Brunswick engineers. Our partners were, of course, Natural Resources Canada. A shout out to them on funding our 3-year project. We also had the government of New Brunswick through our climate change secretariat working with us. And interesting enough, Engineers Geoscientists New Brunswick, our regulator for engineers in New Brunswick, were a big partner in this go-ahead as supporters. Both engineering universities in our provinces, UNB, and ourselves, Université de Moncton, were all together in this project. Now, on the next slide, we'll see the partners are led by a management team, and this huge team is myself and Catherine Leblanc, both of us managing this great project and these great partners. We were very privileged and proud to have led this program, which increased the resilience of our engineers by giving themselves clear and precise objectives, which we will see on the next slide. Our objectives were to develop and train, develop training resources, better equip and advance our climate change adaptation in our communities also, not just helping the people, but the communities too. As a bonus, we kind of became some small leaders in Canada in climate change adaptation. So that was quite impressive. And how did we do this? Well, we held webinars, we had in-person and virtual workshops, we developed courses and modules and training resources. On the next slide, let's look a little closer at these activities together, starting with the webinars and workshops. So we had a series of 6 webinars for New Brunswick engineers. One was a national webinar for all our BRACE audience, as the over 30 BRACE projects. 6 of them talked to engineers, most likely and professionals. We also had in-person workshops, 3 in person, 1 on the national side, and 2 virtual on the national side. And I can assure you now, as we're looking for tips to move forward, the in-person workshops were so energizing. It's really a catalyst to moving things forward versus the webinars, which are an online presence. Like today, you might get to see my my ugly mug there, but for the rest of you, I don't get to see and react on that side. So these are the certain things that we had put together. Now, the next activities are on the next slide regarding our courses and our training resources. So we developed with Dr. Infrastructure in Ottawa area, a course, virtually intensive 15 hours on climate change risk assessments for engineers. And in New Brunswick, we are a fully bilingual province, so we offered the coursework in French and in English on separate occasions. And if you're bilingual, then you can follow them in either language that you like, depending on the availability we had. These courses were given once a week in a 3-hour span with exam at the end, with a certification on that end. So we were quite proud to offer the course, which also had one of our training resources, which was the Climate Change Risk Assessment Toolkit with a nice fancy Excel spreadsheet, which engineers all love, able to do a simple enough climate change assessment on risks for any type of infrastructure. We're also working on a website to put all these things on. We're working on a rebranding for our website already with our new opportunities, so they will be available to all soon enough. And finally, case studies, local case studies that we were able to share with our engineers on, how does it work in New Brunswick? Now that we've learned a bit of these great activities in New Brunswick, if we go to the next slide, I'd like to talk a bit on what we've learned on putting these trainings on. Well, there's a significant participation of engineers in New Brunswick. And I mean significant. We've focused on, or we've reached 460 engineers in total. Some were repeat attendance to our webinars and workshops. On our assessment course, we've certified 30 engineers in French and in English. And we found that there's a serious interest in climate change adaptation in all engineering disciplines, not just civil engineering, which I work in, but when we had our in-person workshops, the energy was high, and the collaboration was key. And Curt talked about that too. And I think that was a game changer there. And we've gotten important and encouraging feedback from our provincial engineers and also on the national level, where we've learned that some of the things we were doing were being done elsewhere at the same time, and we're able to work together and have these national meetings to see how can we best move forward with what we've learned all over Canada. So following all these rewarding activities for the past 3 years, we're not only very successful in New Brunswick, but to our great surprise, we also had a huge success at the Canadian level, as per our next slide, please. So in New Brunswick, we're managing with a small team of 2, and we're able to do that fairly well, thanks to Catherine, of course, on my end. And we were chosen nationally for 2 workshop panels, which went very well. Our bilingual capacities for most deliverables were well sought out, especially on a national level, and it's a pleasure for us. We are also able to join the Infrastructure and Buildings Working Group and had a few discussions with them and their group on the website. One important partnership we were able to work through was through the CSA group. And the CSA group, Canadian Standards Association, we were the first to launch a Canada webinar series on their codes and standards that they're putting together. And interesting enough, CSA group has the mandate to share these new codes, and they have adopted their codes to include climate change adaptation data. Now, their codes and standards are voluntary. They're not government forced to do so or whatnot. So we were able to get those experts in to talk to our engineers on bridge codes, on the electrical code, and all the codes in general that have had changes due to climate change, which are a whole bunch. They're doing great work over there. And finally, on the national side, we were invited by Infrastructure Canada to join their expert advisory table on adopting their first national adaptation strategy. I sit on a board there to look at the infrastructure side, learning a lot from that end, representing our Atlantic Canada side on that side too, and seeing that in the next few months, the federal government will have a plan on what we should be doing to help adapt to climate change. It'll be fanned out to the provinces, and we're ready there to jump on that and include our collaborators to move forward. So in addition to these successes, we've had 2 value-added projects I want to share with you today for our Canadian engineers. On the next slide, we'll start with our first project, being the Adaptation Resource Pathway. So as you see the little slide there, it is available at Natural Resources Canada. You can click on any of those little stepping stones to learn more on where can I find information on climate change adaptation. Are you new at this and you start at the explore and learn? Are you already a seasoned practitioner? Then you'll go in the act and reflect, and you can find resources there on who's doing what in today's day and age on climate change. We put that together in the last few years, which is great. And finally, in our end here, we've put together a best practices guide for professional training of engineers in climate change adaptation. So we put together a primer, and then we're working on a scientific article also on how best to, if you want to train engineers or professionals, what's the best way to do so? And I'll talk a bit about that in a few minutes. So following the recent ends of the project, on our next slide, we'll show how our management team has continued its success. So our next steps, we're looking at promoting our best practices guide and putting it online. It's almost ready to go. We've just put the finishing touches on that. We're partnering with the government of New Brunswick on prioritizing funding on existing community climate change adaptation plans. In New Brunswick here, most municipalities have climate change adaptation plans. We're pulling them all together and trying to figure out what's been done, what needs to be done, and how can government best invest in getting these plans completed. Having that, we're making our community stronger and more ready for future climate change, and also looking at trends on what's missing and what should we be looking at our next climate change plans. That's ongoing right now. And secondly, we're partnering with the University of New Brunswick again to help all New Brunswick infrastructure owners collaborate on the best practices of managing infrastructure. We're a small province. We have big cities and rural communities, and we have such a great collaboration network that we're putting them together to see who's doing what and learning from others on how we can all get to a certain level of asset management, climate change adaptation, to name a few. And the two universities in the province are putting together to help be the hub to manage this, research and development for these communities. So these are exciting opportunities for us as climate change adaptation professionals. We're contributing against resilience, against climate change in our communities, in our society. Now allow me to close the loop on our presentation with a summary of our findings on the next slide. So, as you might all know, in climate change adaptation, there's no magic solution. I sometimes say yet, because maybe we'll find some. Our climate change professionals are sought to reflect. So people are on the line now today. We're reflecting, we're thinking a little bit harder on what can we do to help everybody else out. But we feel that they need, first of all, basic education on climate change, on adaptation, on weather patterns, on what we're looking for in the future, and then specializing in certain areas to help where the need is to be held. So our labor market is already looking for specialists in climate change adaptation. If you look at the job sites or the job look, they're looking for climate change specialists. As far as I know, there's not many universities offering that course right now. So we're looking at IRPs and similar things to prove that there are some people that are ready to go on that. Our BRACE project has provided us training, certifications, tools, and data for our engineers here in New Brunswick. And our main takeaway is the training itself. How to match the goal of the training with the type of the training. So today we're sitting at a webinar, and sometimes we expect that by giving a 1-hour webinar, everybody that's online today, I see 122 people are left, that you're going to go back to your offices and be a climate change adaptation specialist, or you're going to make a difference. But really, it needs a little more than that. And our model that we found by polling across Canada what the other training institutes were doing is you need your type of training to add a little more than that, either multiple training sessions, mentorship, authentic on-site learnings, to name a few. And we're going to share that with all of you on how it is to best build your training sessions so that you get the better results that you're looking for. And in the end, the ultimate goal is better preparing our Atlantic Canadian professionals for a better future. And same with yourselves. I wish you the very best with that. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Serge, and thanks for your final inspirational words. Before moving to the Q&A session, I see a clarifying question here for you, Serge. How soon do you expect the best practices guide to be available online, and is there a way to be notified when the guide is put online?
So absolutely, we are just going through, because of translation, it takes us a little bit more time for anything else. And so we're going through that right now. And then they'll be available, I imagine, in the next month or so. It'll be shared through the national or the NRCan. And also, I think with the list that we have today, I don't mind sharing that with the people that are on the call today. So maybe a little email out and a link for you to connect to would be ideal.
Great, Serge. I'm sure many will appreciate that. So thank you all for the informative presentations, and thanks for respecting your time. It means that we have about 11 minutes left for the Q&A period, which is great. So if you have any questions, comments, now is your time to add them to the Q&A box. And of course, if we're not able to get to all of them today, we'll follow up after by email. So I'll look at the question. I see we had a couple of questions on implementing what the learners or the participant in your training learned. So do you know of any examples of participants that then apply their knowledge of the PIVC protocol or really any other training and use it in their work or for their project? And is there a way that you track that sort of things? So I don't know who wants to take that question first. I see Serge, you're unmuted, so.
I can start. So because our project just finished now and we're a smaller province, we've certified 30 engineers on our coursework, and one of our work that we're looking to do is to reach out to them. At 30 people, it's easy to reach out and to have a survey and then reach back to see what have they done, how have they used it, or how have they not used it, and to learn from that to better our skills for after that. So we haven't done it yet. We are planning to do so.
Great, thanks.
I think I would just add, we are kind of tracking this. It's going to take obviously time for people to kind of evolve with this, right? Like even going through an individual course, like the course that we have on the PIVC protocol, it's, providing the foundational knowledge and doing it, but there's still going to be a progression after the course, right? If you do the PIVC protocol course, there's probably still a couple of steps before you're able to sort of really kind of independently take on a PIVC project or a full sort of assessment on your own. So maybe you would do the course and then work with somebody who's got more experience with PIVC. And then maybe it's, a couple of steps down the road before you're sort of independently leading, a PIVC or a climate risk assessment. So it's going to take a little bit of time to track those results, but we do obviously do the, survey follow-ups, and, we are trying to maintain contact with all the people that have, taken the courses. And then obviously, with the IRP credential, because it's multiple courses, we're seeing people sort of come back to different courses and developing, different sets of knowledges as well. So assuming that they're making efforts to apply that knowledge if they're coming back for more of it. So.
Yeah, from our perspective, the outcome of the Manitoba MCRT was primarily an awareness building and an awareness raising kind of outcome rather than anything specific. We did receive some feedback from some of the participants that said that, for example, they weren't aware of the nature-based solutions as a possible alternative to some other, hard infrastructure. And others, so it was just more of a general, I think I've learned something here as far as what's available. I'm going to pursue it further without anything specific.
I think just one last thing that I would sort of add anecdotally is that we've certainly seen within organizations or larger companies, additional people from the same company sort of coming into it. So we know that there's somebody that's got experience with PIVC there, and there's a broader suite of their staff that are coming in to do the course. And then so you can anticipate that they're sort of working on, teams doing these types of assessments. So assuming that they're applying the knowledge and that they're taking the course as part of a strategic investment on the behalf of that company.
I see we have a lot of good questions, so let's move to another one. So someone is asking, actually is curious about the disciplines of engineers who have been engaging with the training and other materials. Is it largely civil engineers, or are you seeing a variety of specializations?
I'd be happy to go first on that one.
Go ahead.
I just pulled up the registration list for one of our upcoming courses and just kind of scanned out like what's your area of focus, and we've had folks from building, linear infrastructure like roads, water, wastewater. Certainly is still sort of, I would say probably the highest representation is sort of that civil infrastructure for sure. But we have seen architecture folks, people from mining sectors. We've had electrical engineers come into the courses, utilities and energy sector as well. So, and building and construction. So we are definitely getting people from across those sectors for sure.
Our results are fairly similar, Paul. Yeah, I'm just looking at exactly.
Same here in Atlantic Canada, mostly civil, because we're talking infrastructure, but infrastructure also includes the buildings. So we have some electrical engineers and mechanicals, and we're trying to reach out more to them. And when we looked at the building codes at the standard side, we had the bridge people, also structural, and we also had the electrical side, and showed that if a fun note on the electrical code at CSA Group had the most changes due to climate change adaptation than any of the other codes they worked on, including bridges and whatnot. And the electrical engineers had accepted all of the recommendations, so each and every one of them. So as sometimes we seem to forget about them, and I think they're heavily involved, and they all need to be involved.
Thanks. We did receive a question from when people registered. It's quite of a broad question, but someone was interested to know about Indigenous approaches and cases on climate change adaptation, mitigation, and/or monitoring. I know, Curt, you did, well, your project did some specific work with Indigenous organizations, so it's quite broad, but maybe you can talk to it a little bit.
Sure, Dominique. With respect to the MCRT, it was primarily intended to be an awareness-raising engagement kind of activity. And so using our connections that the Prairie Climate Center had with Turtle Lodge and reaching out to those communities. But a more specific example that I was thinking of since I read that question was a project that I worked on in northern Manitoba. It was a biomass project for a northern First Nation that's Winter Road diesel dependent community, and the project has replaced about 30% of the heat load in the community with local burnt wood that has been killed by forest fires. And the reason for the success of that project was because of the early and continual engagement of the leadership of the community, and the prospect and the realization of employment in the community. So that, like, it was focused that training was part of the project, that employment was part of the project. And this now that it's been in operation for, I think, 3 years or so, it's now the biggest employer in the community. And so therefore the community feels ownership of the project, is recognized as being the owners of the project. So that's my biggest takeaway is understanding who owns this project. It's not Big Daddy in Ottawa, it's somebody on the ground in the community. So that's my biggest recommendation.
Don't know, Serge, Paul, if you have anything else to add. Otherwise, we'll move to another question.
Yeah, I would just add that, we are trying trying to improve, constantly on the way that we incorporate sort of Indigenous approaches and Indigenous knowledge within each of the courses. So it's not a standalone courses. We spend a fair bit of time within our planning courses talking about engagement and consultation, the incorporation of Indigenous knowledge in risk assessment as a critical piece, how to kind of, think about that and use that potentially sort of alongside climate science and Western science perspectives. So there are definitely different ways in which that gets worked in, and through our review committees that I mentioned, we also do try to have diversity of representation, including, Indigenous perspectives on those various committees that we've had.
We only have 2 minutes left, but there's one question that I still would like to ask, if we can answer quickly. So what one ingredient would each panelist suggest has been critical to their respective success in building engineers' capacity to understand climate risk, resilience, and adaptation? So Paul, if you want to start. One ingredient.
Yeah, I think, our one ingredient, I think, is just trying to be responsive to these. So we're really doing our best to kind of respond to, identified needs out there. So we take our time in the project and the program development phase to make sure we understand what the needs are and how to get training out to people. Logistically, where are the voices that they're going to see these kinds of things, but also what do they need to learn and where are they at presently? And so that takes a little bit of time in the course development phase, but I think it's been important in sort of building audience with it and making sure that it meets the needs where people are at.
Good. Serge, what would be your one ingredient?
So I'll say it in French and English. C'est la confiance, trustworthiness in who's presenting or who's speaking, in the data you have, in the examples you have that are local. If the people trust it, then you move forward. And it's taken us 3 years to get there, and now it's rolling along. So.
Great. And Curt?
Well, I just echo what's been said. Like engineers like to have something solid, right? So case studies, numbers, wherever you can be specific, the audience would really respond to that. And the other aspect was giving them opportunity to dialogue and exchange with each other. Anytime we just presented information, it was like, but if there was an opportunity for a breakout session or some way, that's where Serge was mentioning how successful his on-site live engagements, that was, and I think that's necessary. Practitioners need to get together and share experience.
Excellent. Good way to end this webinar. It's 2, and we didn't get to all the great questions, so we'll follow up after by email. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, including, of course, our 3 presenters. And we would appreciate if you could take a few minutes to fill the evaluation form. Claire will add the link to the chat, and it will also be included in the copy of the slides you will receive post-webinar. So we welcome any comments to help us improve the upcoming webinars. And please join us for the next webinar in this series on October 3rd for building adaptation skills for planners. The registration will be launched soon with other topics to follow shortly thereafter. So on this note, it's 2:01. So merci à tous. Thank you again, everyone. Have a nice day and see you beginning of October, hopefully. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.